footballgameplan.com, where football makes sense. I'm Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook, bring you our FBS Wraparound, where we're going to go across the country to take a look at some of the key games this week in the FBS. But first, let's start off out in Provo, Utah, as BYU plays host to Boise State.
The Broncos are first in the Mountain West Conference, led by a punishing defense, but this week there's still a slight question mark at the quarterback position, with the status of Joe Southwood still up in the air. But the Broncos can definitely run the football, and they really can control the line of scrimmage. But so can the Cougars of BYU, with both quarterback Taysom Hill and running back Jamal Williams. And quietly, despite the defensive chaos last week versus Houston, this is still a very good and smothering defensive football team. I like BYU in this ballgame. I'm willing to call last week an anomaly. Houston was a different matchup. They forced you to spread the field, but I think the Cougars have enough defense and the running game to slow down Boise and take care of business at home. Next up, we have Houston taking on Rutgers, and for the Cougars in this ballgame, tough loss last week versus BYU. But what I like most about this Houston football team is the balance, and I want you to keep an eye on sophomore wide receiver Deontay Greenberry, one of the best players in the country, and he should make many All-American teams this year. And they also boast one of the fastest defenses in the country. Now for Rutgers, I don't want to put it all on one player, but until the Scarlet Knights get better play at the quarterback position, they'll always be shorthanded. Although the roster is always stockpiled with talent, they have to get better play from the most important position on a football field, which is why I'm going with Houston. I know last week got out of hand, but I think this is a very solid football team, both on offense as well as on defense. Next up, we have the Minnesota Golden Gophers hosting the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And for Nebraska in this game, I'm loving what I'm seeing from running back Amir Abdullah. He's one of the more dynamic backs in the country. And defensively, they've been solid. But as was the case versus the South Dakota State Jackrabbits, the Golden Gophers will test that run defense all day long. Now for Minnesota in this ball game, they do a great job on both sides of the line of scrimmage. And that's how they win games, and that's why they win games. Their defense will be vital this week, and the biggest matchup will be Rashid Hageman, the talented defensive tackle, versus that Huskers interior offensive line. I like Nebraska in this ballgame. I can trust their offense more so than the Golden Gophers, although this will be a physical game that will be won at the point of attack, and I think Nebraska's offensive line will match up well versus the defensive line of the Gophers. Big battle in the MAC this week between Toledo and Bowling Green. And for the Rockets in this ball game, it's all about maximizing opportunities. That will be the theme this week against the Falcons. And they have a good battery on offense. You look at center Zach Karen, the running back David Llewellyn, wide receiver Bernard Reed, and quarterback Terrence Owens. But on defense, the defensive backs, in my opinion, will have to stay active versus quarterback Matt Johnson. And for the Falcons, you look at that sophomore quarterback Matt Johnson, will only get better in time, but he has been light years better, in my opinion, than Matt Shields. And I think the constant all season long for the Falcons has been their defense. I tell you right now, their back seven is highly impressive, and that's why I'm going Bowling Green. You have to be able to stop what Toledo brings to the table. They can spread the field, they can beat you on the ground, they can beat you through the air, but Bowling Green's defense is one of the best in the country, so I like the Falcons at home over Toledo. An excellent matchup in the Mountain West Conference as Wyoming travels to San Jose State. And for the Cowboys in this ballgame, the offense was completely out of sync last week versus Colorado State, and quietly they fell apart defensively. This week is all about getting aggressive versus the wide receivers of San Jose State. You want to make David Fales hold on to that football just a little bit long so that way you can get pressure on him and put him on the ground. Now for the Spartans in this game, they have posted back-to-back victories after losing 3 straight, and the key has been their ability to finally get the ground game going and find opportunities on the ground. The key matchup, in my opinion, will be their offensive line versus that light defensive front of Wyoming. I think that's how they'll ultimately win the game, which is why I'm going with the Spartans to knock off the Cowboys. Big battle in the Big 12 between Texas Tech and Oklahoma. You look at Texas Tech in this ball game, and another huge test for the Red Raiders, who's passed the previous 7 by going 7-0, obviously. The thing I'm looking for in this game is how can he consistently move the football versus a very tough Oklahoma defense that doesn't break in the red zone. Now for Oklahoma, the things that we know, number one, the Sooners can definitely run the rock, and number two, they can play good defense. The biggest concern will be if Texas Tech jumps out early on these guys, can the Sooners pass their way back into the football game? I don't think they can, which is why I think Texas Tech moves on to 8-0 by knocking off Oklahoma on the road. And finally, our spotlight game of the week takes place in the Pac-12 as UCLA travels up to Eugene to battle the Oregon Ducks. And for the Bruins in this ballgame, it's the little things like getting off to an early start, protecting the football, getting off the field on third downs defensively. And in my opinion, the latter part will be even more important this week as they're facing one of the best, if not the best, offense in the country in Oregon. Now, for the Ducks in this ballgame, the high-flying Oregon offense doesn't get enough credit for what they do in the trenches. That offensive line is phenomenal. And you also have to love the fact that Marcus Mariota, their talented quarterback, hasn't thrown an interception all season long, and it's also tough to score against these guys defensively. But I like UCLA in this ballgame. If you look at last week's game versus Stanford, the self-inflicted wounds killed the Bruins. This is a very talented football team, both on offense and on defense. I love their offensive line, despite being young and inexperienced. I think they do match up well defensively versus the Oregon Ducks. So I think their defense will cause the Ducks problems. I think Brett Hundley will do a great job in pulling the upset on the road for the Bruins, knocking off Oregon.